Everybody who serves in the military has some great stories of adventure that we love to share and regale our friends and family with. In the Navy, we call these sea stories. Whatever your branch of service, however, all of these stories have their beginning somewhere. And for enlisted personnel, this is a place we call boot camp. Stay tuned.
I originally enlisted in 1992 and reported to Marine Corps Recruit Depot in Pierside, South Carolina, where I was assigned to 1st Battalion Platoon 1050. One day, while we were performing drill movements on the parade deck in preparation for our graduation pass and review, I mistakenly broke the position of attention and swatted a sand flea on my neck, which caught the attention of my drill instructor. I was then instructed to pick up said deceased sand flea and double time back to the sand pit, where I proceeded to dig a trench for Sandy and afterwards play taps for his burial service. Godspeed, Sandy. Godspeed.
Hello, welcome to Pierside here on Sparks 1524. I'm Nathaniel Miller. Recruit Training Command, or RTC, is the Navy's general induction command that trains enlisted sailors. Now, RTC had its beginnings following the Spanish-American War when the Navy began training enlisted personnel up in the Great Lakes region. And in fact, Naval Station Great Lakes was at the forefront of naval racial integration. In 1942, the Navy opened the general ranks of enlisted sailors to African American individuals, and they began training at Great Lakes. And the famous Golden 13, the Navy's first 13 black officers, were trained up at Naval Station Great Lakes. There were a number of boot camps that were established across the country for the Navy following World War II, but in the era of budget cuts that went on in the late 20th century, the Navy is now down to just the one boot camp, RTC, which is still aboard Naval Station Great Lakes. I have actually never talked about my boot camp experiences, and there's a couple of reasons for this. The first one's pretty obvious. Once you're in the fleet and you've launched F-14 Tomcats off a flight deck in wartime, you've explored Japanese caves from World War II that still had live explosives and human remains inside. You've hung off the bow of USS Ponce photographing dolphins diving through the bow wave. And you've been the chief military editor for Fleet Week New York, the Navy's biggest annual public outreach. Boot camp kind of fades into the background. Another reason was I honestly shoved a lot of those memories into the background because I thought I was a coward and weakling. I was not diagnosed with autism until I was 51 years old. I'm 52 now, so I've only been living with this diagnosis and understanding its ramifications for the last 12 months. Autism in the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s wasn't recognized or understood very well. And except for individuals who are completely locked up in their own head, or the famous autistic savant, the spectrum just wasn't understood. As it turns out, I'm actually pretty damn deep on the spectrum, but I was always just outside what was recognized. A lot of my boot camp experiences were kind of shrouded in that misunderstanding of myself. But my Navy story, like everybody else's, has to start somewhere, and that somewhere is Recruit Training Command, located next to Lake Michigan aboard Naval Station Great Lakes, Illinois.
I was on the what we call balls to four watch, which was midnight to 4 o'clock in the morning, and so about 3:50 in the morning, we looked at the watch bill and realized that nobody was on the watch bill for the remainder of the night after 4 o'clock in the morning. So, being the geniuses that we were, we figured, oh, that's the end of our shift. Time to go to bed. So that's what we did. We're woken up so very gently by the boot camp instructors, and that was when I learned the fifth general order, which is I will quit my post only when properly relieved. We were informed that we were not properly relieved, so we were not supposed to quit our post. So for the next hour and a half to 2 hours, we underwent intensive training, which the rest of us just called getting beat, which was up downs or push ups, sit ups, 8 counts, mountain climbers, jumping jacks, and any other kind of physical training the instructors wanted to tell us to do. The entire time we were repeating the fifth general order. Towards the end of boot camp, one day I was tired and I decided I would be real smart and clean under my rack to make sure there were no dust bunnies under there, because that was a big thing. Problem is, that was just my way of taking a nap. A while later, I wake up, turn and look, and one of my RDCs is on the ground, head on her hands, looking at me, and she just smiles and says, "Morning, sunshine." I said, "Good morning, petty officer." And she replied, "Toes on the gun line," which was never something you wanted to hear. Luckily, it was towards the end, and the RDCs were being kind of cool with us. So we only did about a half hour of what we called rack drills, which was tearing apart our rack and putting them back together. And then after that, we went to dinner. It could have been much worse, but I still just remember the look on her face.
I joined the Navy on September 16th, 1997. Now, before the first 48 hours of boot camp can happen, I have to get there. I had been living in Tallahassee, so I'd already moved out of my apartment, put my stuff in storage, and I was staying with some friends, and the recruiter was going to pick me up and drive me to Jacksonville. So he picked me up about 8 or 9 in the morning on September 15th, 1997. It's about a 3-hour drive to Jacksonville from Tallahassee. So we got there. I checked into the hotel that the Navy provided. The next day, the bus would pick me up and take me to the military entrance processing station. I was terrified. I was shaking. I was sweating. I just wanted to go home. I felt like I was going to be executed the next day. I distracted myself that night by going across the street to a movie theater and saw George of the Jungle starring Brendan Fraser. That was the last film I ever saw as a civilian. My first 48 hours really began when I got up about 3 o'clock in the morning on September 16th. Packed up my meager belongings and went down to have breakfast. The hotel actually had an early continental breakfast put out for us recruits, and then the bus came to take us to the Military Entrance Processing Station, or MEPS. MEPS are regional processing stations around the country, and they in process recruits from all five, well, six branches of service now, but in 97 it was only five branches. The Space Force was still far in the future. So we got there about 6:30 in the morning, walk in the door, and we start getting shuffled around. Navy goes this way, Air Force here, Army, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and we start in processing. And it's a day full of paperwork and talking to people to make sure you want to do this, followed by paperwork, followed by talking to people to make sure you want to do this, followed by paperwork. A medical exam, that's a funny story. That's when I found out I had wisdom teeth. I'm sitting there in the dentist chair, and the dentist is checking the fillings I have, making sure they're secure, there's no new cavities, the usual. Huh. Seaman Recruit Miller. They're already calling me Seaman Recruit Miller, even though I haven't officially sworn in yet. Seaman Recruit Miller, you've got all your wisdom teeth. My first thought was, crap. And I asked him, do I have to get them out before boot camp or can I wait till I'm in the fleet? Miller, you don't need to worry about it. You got the biggest mouth I've ever seen. We had a light lunch around noon, and about noon 30 or 1300, 1 o'clock, we had the swearing in ceremony. So we all trooped over to the auditorium. And at this point, we're not broken into Navy, Army, or anything. We're just one big glut of new recruits. I was not expecting my parents to show up. I grew up here in Florida in a little town called Niceville, and it's a 6-hour drive from Jacksonville. And I'd already told them I might be able to talk to him for maybe 10 or 15 minutes after the swearing in ceremony before I get whisked to the airport. I just wasn't expecting them to make a 12-hour drive round trip. Walk in the auditorium, and there's mom and dad. It was the one moment in that whole first 24 hours that I felt good. So we all get ready to swear in, but before we raise our hand, the lieutenant, and it was a Navy lieutenant conducting this ceremony, gave us a little idea of what we're going to face. I still remember these exact words. Quote, "You will be sleep deprived and stress induced," unquote. Got to spend a few minutes with mom and dad after the ceremony, get on the bus, go to the airport. Now, I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt. I grew up in the tropics. It's September in Florida. It's still balmy. T-shirt and shorts, more than enough. Except I'm heading to Chicago in September. I was freezing on the airplane. I had a little thin blanket. Couldn't sleep. I think we landed at O'Hare around 9 or 10 that night. We get on the buses that we're directed to, and we call them in the Navy Recruit Division Commanders, or RDCs. That's our version of a drill sergeant. And they're petty officers or chief petty officers. There were 3 buses, maybe 4, to take us from the airport to boot camp. As we get on them and sit down, the RDCs come aboard and start yelling at us. I do remember seeing some people around me looking shocked or disorientated. I was really detached. I hadn't slept since 3 that morning because, unlike everybody else on that airplane, I'd been freezing. So I was really completely exhausted. We'd had very little to eat. At this point, I'm kind of feeling like I'm watching a television documentary on boot camp, but I really don't feel like I'm there yet.
I do remember as it was snowing there, and we were in Ship 12, which was at the very, very back, the old World War II barracks, way in the back. I'm sure they're probably gone. We call those, open bay, asbestos barracks, whatever you want to call them. But I got really sick when I was in boot camp. A lot of us did. I think there was about 50 of us, and 26 of us got pneumonia while we were in there. I got pneumonia so bad that I ended up not telling, the RDCs, because I didn't want to get asthma, because I knew that would, set me back. I didn't want to either get set back for a week or get set back to week 1. So I was kind of struggling through it about halfway through when I started getting pneumonia. So it was a struggle, just getting through the basic training portion. Now, I do remember when we did our battle stations, which is usually the last quote unquote test that we do in boot camp there. I remember vividly that I was having very, very difficult time breathing, because at the time I had already had pneumonia probably close to a month, so it was getting bad. But on the Liberty weekend, I ended up going across the road over there to the medical center in Great Lakes. She took some x-rays, the officer over there, the medical officer, and she said, yeah, you got a 2-inch spot of pneumonia in your left lung. She's like, well, you want to know the good news and you want to know the bad news? Which one do you want to know first? I said, well, give me the good news. She's like, well, you're alive. So I was like, oh, okay. She's like, bad news is that's the largest spot of pneumonia I've ever seen on a living patient. So yeah, I was pretty close to being, checking out, so to speak. And I remember when we were doing our last checks, when we're standing at our bed and standing at attention, the RDC was walking around and he's looking at everybody. He's eyeballing everybody as he's walking around. And he walks up to me. He does a about face and he looks at me and says, you don't look good, man.
The receiving hall at RTC is a gorgeous structure, and the first passageway that we were in, they separated us into 2 lines, standing at attention, facing each other. The RDCs are going through and pulling our orders, which we're carrying in manila envelopes, and they're starting to sort us and shuffle us around. The very first thing we did after that was a urinalysis. Go pee in a cup. And the Navy takes this stuff seriously. I remember the next day, about 5 or maybe 6 recruits were gone after the urinalysis. They had analyzed it that fast. We got a phone call home. We had to stand at attention and wait for permission to pick up the phone and call our parents. But I got through to mom and dad real quick, let them know I'm alive and that I'm okay. And then I, of course, hang up and we get on with the process. One of the guys that ended up in my division was named Jason, and this kid was about 6'6", second tallest guy I ever ran into in the Navy. Jason had my undying respect from the moment we got off that airplane, because I realized that the first time I saw him was at the airport. He showed up to boot camp with bright blue hair. His hair was the color of my studio background, maybe even a little brighter. He caught hell from every RDC and their Aunt Susan from O'Hare Airport all the way through our first haircut. We've got all this basic processing done. Now we're in our Smurfs. This is our first uniform. It's a set of blue sweats. We call them Smurfs. It's also when we were issued these recruit ball caps. Now, unfortunately, this is the only ball cap I have that is not an original to my career. I got rid of the recruit ball cap when we graduated boot camp, and I wish I kept it, but I didn't. So I got myself another one just to complete my command ball cap collection. We finally get to the galley around 5 in the morning. So now I've been up over 24 hours. We crowd in the galley, and this is the first place I find warmth. I was freezing on the airplane. I was freezing in the receiving hall. Now I'm wearing sweats, and I'm in a building that's stifling, and I'm dehydrated, and I'm hungry, and we're all stressed and scared, but I'm dealing with a level probably more than most people. Not a good combination. But then I heard somebody singing. There was an African American female up in the serving line, and she was singing, "Pancakes for my shipmate, bacon for my shipmate, ooh, waffles for my shipmate." Trust me, her voice was way better than mine. Turns out she was a recruit. 1 week during boot camp, you do service week, which is where your division goes and works around the base. And this is usually midway through training. So she's a recruit like us. She was up as early as we are. She'd already been through PT and all that. Now she's working, serving food. And she is clearly bound and determined to have a good time and start our day off on a high note. It's the first time I really understood the wisdom of finding beauty in the darkness, finding a perfect moment of peace in an otherwise stressful situation. And that's a lesson that took with me through my whole career. And then I fainted.
Some kid, for whatever reason, didn't want to select or elect for the GI Bill. He was called up in front of everyone and just sort of given the, I don't know, like, here's your intro to boot camp sort of thing. I had already been to college. I wasn't really looking to do the GI Bill. It's money taken out of your pay for like 12 months. But I checked it. There was no way I was not going to elect to take it. And in the end, I'm glad I did. It was something I was able to pass on to my children. So in hindsight, good idea. So thank you to whoever that RDC was who sort of berated that poor kid in front of everybody else and made me take the GI Bill. I remember we were sitting there, I think it was mid-May sometime right after we got there, maybe just 2 or 3 weeks after we got there. We were sitting in there and one of the RDCs was going over something. And I remember the second one, he came running in, he stopped everything and, he spread the news, or he let us know that Admiral Borda had died. And I didn't really know much about Admiral Borda other than he was the CNO at the time and we were having to learn, the chain of command. It wasn't until later I found out what a great impact he'd had on sailors. He was known as the sailor's sailor. He's the person who, I think, he changed the sailors' creed from blue jackets to Navy. He really believed that all service members, all sailors, right? You were a sailor first and you were your rank second. It didn't matter if you were enlisted or officer, right? You were a sailor first and foremost. And I could tell that his death really had an impact on the RDCs at the time. And it wasn't later until I found out, everything he had done for the sailors.
I dropped like a rock. Now we're packed in so tight, we're packed in nut to butt. I didn't hit the deck, the guys caught me. But I remember hearing her singing. And I remember my knees wobbling. And next thing I know, I'm sitting in a chair by one of the tables drinking water, or trying to, and there's a couple of corpsmen. I know. I saw it at boot camp. I saw it in the fleet. I know people malinger. I know, especially at boot camp, you have a lot of recruits that feign illness or injury. But I've got dilated pupils, a thready pulse, clammy skin, and I know they recorded that because I'm listening to one of the corpsmen writing that down. Pupils dilated, pulse thready, whatever the pulse was. And they're treating me like I'm shirking. The worst part is every time I try to take a drink of water, one of them would cut in and demand me to tell them something, but I could not speak. This is another trait I never understood in myself growing up until getting diagnosed with autism last year. When I would get upset, it's not difficult for me to speak because I'm so emotional. I physically cannot speak. I can hear the words in my head, but none of the machinery works. That's an autism trait. It's a result of the brain jamming up because of the overstimulation. So not only can I not get a drink of water down, these guys are demanding things and I can't even answer because I cannot speak. It was not a pleasant morning.
I was late to arrive, so I actually didn't get that big welcome that most recruits do, where they have to pick up their bags, drop their bags, stand in line, and generally get screamed at by the technical instructors or the TIs. My dad had gone through basic training for the Air Force during the Vietnam War. He was never sent to Vietnam, but he did go through basic training and then on to Turkey for his assignment. He had told me that the technical instructors, or the drill instructors at that time, as they were called, were known to get physical with the recruits. They would kick or punch them or shove them, and generally just be physical with them. So as I was going to basic training, I was expecting to be slapped, pushed around, maybe even hit. And I was a little bit anxious about that, I'll admit. When I got to basic training, it didn't take long for me to realize that that was no longer the case. I think within the first 3 days, we were all standing in formation and they were teaching us the proper way to salute. And one of the TIs came up to me, got in my face real close and said, "Permission to touch." And I really didn't know what to make of that. I wasn't sure I was hearing right. I was kind of flummoxed. And the TI repeated, "Permission to touch, airman." And so I said, "Permission granted." And the TI moved my hand so that it was in the proper salute. And at that point, I realized there was not going to be any physical contact between the recruits and the TIs. And at that point, I relaxed and I kept my head down and basically did what my dad had advised me to do, which was volunteer for nothing, keep quiet, and keep your head down, which worked pretty well for the rest of basic training. Unfortunately, I did contract chickenpox my 3rd week there, and they quarantined me immediately in the hospital. I was given my own hospital room. The doctors and the TIs that came to see me were all kitted up like I was some sort of biological warfare experiment. It was pretty funny. My heart rate dropped down into the 40s, and they were worried about me because I was running a high fever. But I was in the hospital for a week or so, and then they rolled me back to a different flight since my flight had progressed, of course. They were on like week 5. I got rolled back through week 3, and the TIs actually treated me okay once they realized that I wasn't being rolled back for some disciplinary infraction, but rather due to illness. I found out later that chickenpox was a real threat to basic training. They were concerned that it was going to become an epidemic. So that's why they were so quick to quarantine me. I was the first female through the obstacle course. And when I got to the largest water obstacle, which we had to run and jump and grab a rope and swing across the water and land on the other side and then continue going, and it was just monkey bars after that. Well, I got through the rope part, and they needed a female observer, someone who could swim, to watch over the rest of the recruits as they came through the obstacle course. So I got stationed there at the rope swing, and there was a recruit that came through who was terrified of the water. And she was acting squirrely before she ran and jumped for the rope. And then she missed the rope. She fell in the water. Now, the water was only waist deep. But for someone that's unfamiliar with water or scared, it was a really big deal. And she panicked. She actually started to drown. So she went under the water, even though the water was only waist deep, because she didn't realize she could put her feet down. So the TI said, "Get in there." And so I jumped in and I just grabbed her on the waist and I took her over to the side and I said, "Put your feet down." And then when she didn't listen very well, I kind of yelled it in her ear and she put her feet down and she stopped panicking and struggling and trying to climb me. And she was able to get out and continue the rest of the obstacle course.
The Navy names the barracks after various ships to inculcate a sense of heritage. Everybody was hoping they'd get into the USS Constitution or the USS Arizona for obvious reasons. My division ended up in USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, which began the most odd dance I have ever danced with a ship. Twice during my career, I had orders to report aboard USS Dwight D. Eisenhower as part of the ship's company, and both times they got canceled and I got new orders somewhere else. I finally deployed aboard the Eisenhower in 2012. I was leading a SEOP detachment to augment the ship's media center. The first ship I served on symbolically was the barracks USS Dwight D. Eisenhower boot camp. The last ship I ever served aboard, last ship I ever deployed aboard, was the real-life aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower in 2012. After I deployed that deployment, I rolled to shore duty and then eventually retired. We had 3 RDCs. Chief Canales, who was a chief hull technician. They are experts in welding and ship structures. They are also your plumbers. Hull technicians are second only to damage controlmen in their knowledge of damage control techniques. Petty Officer Wilson, a bosun's mate first class. Bosun's mates are experts in deck seamanship, line handling, ship handling, basic navigation, not to the level of a quartermaster, but basic navigation, scraping and painting, all the fun stuff. And IC2 Moore, he was, Petty Officer Moore was a trainee, so he wasn't a full RDC. Chief Canales is one of the 2 or 3 greatest chiefs I ever met in my career. Slow talking country guy. I'm proud to be part of the world's finest nuclear powered Navy. Okay. That's how he talked. It was awesome. He delayed his retirement for nearly a year just to get my division through. He was supposed to retire in early 97, looked at the training schedule and saw that 501, my division, was going to be short an RDC to have Petty Officer Wilson trying to take care of us while also training Petty Officer Moore. So Chief Canales delayed his retirement to make sure my division had proper leadership through boot camp. Like I said, in many ways, he set the model of what a chief petty officer is supposed to be.
My experience in basic training was not especially exciting, or really all that memorable. During my time in basic training, I believe the intent is to break people down, get rid of individual personalities, build everybody up as a high-functioning team, and then graduate a group of airmen. And that's precisely what we did. By the time we graduated, we were definitely slimmer, trimmer, and certainly had that unity of mind that the Air Force sought to instill. I guess it was so good that I did go back and try it again later. So in 2006, I decided to commission with the Air Force and went back to training, did the whole thing over again. What was interesting is a lot of the same problems, the same situations arose, but our mechanism to solve those problems were a little bit different in officer training school. So at BMT, as a young trainee, we were presented with problems and then told how to solve them and had to respond quickly. Did as we were told, and all was good. In the officer training school, we were presented with very similar problems, but we had to devise the solution ourselves. I found that to be significantly more stressful, even though the overlying problem was really nearly the same. Having done it twice, I don't think I would ever go back for a third try, but it was successful enough in getting me to where I am today.
Although boot camp was pretty regimented, a lot of the memories that I've had and that my shipmates and my friends have told me about their own stories kind of are just free floating. One night somewhere in there, I was standing fire watch. I was up at the front end of the compartment, and one of our pastimes when we stood this watch was reading the poster of the 11 General Orders of a Century that stood across from us on the wall and memorizing it. Well, I'm on the 5th General Order, reading it about the 2000th time, when somebody, and I don't know who, from way back at the end of the compartment suddenly screams, "Miller!" I go running back in there, and nobody's awake. Don't know who screamed, don't know what they were having a nightmare about or how the hell I was involved in it, but nobody woke up. The other watch, the other fire watch who was at the aft end of the berthing was on their round, so it was just me in there, and nobody woke up. It started snowing in October, and some of the best memories I have are of watching it snow out the windows when I was standing those late watches. And those were some of those moments of finding beauty in the darkness, finding peaceful moments in the middle of all this craziness. Thus endeth my first 48 hours of boot camp. Hell, the first 24 hours alone were quite a doozy, and it only got more exciting from there. We had a cheating scandal in week 4 or week 6. We had 2 physical readiness tests, and the first one didn't even count. It was just a marker to show recruits what they needed to work on for the final test before graduation. 2 of our guys cheated on the sit-ups and got caught. We're all waiting for them to get thrown out of the division, if not boot camp, because it had been drilled into us since we arrived. There was one unforgivable sin, and that was cheating on anything. Cheating violated all 3 Navy core values, honor, courage, and commitment, at the same time. So we're waiting for these guys to get thrown out. Well, the senior chief petty officer, who was kind of in charge of the whole USS Dwight D. Eisenhower berthing, gave them a very stern talking to. They were bad boys and never do this again. A lot of us had the wind taken out of our sails when that happened. It felt like we got stabbed in the back by senior leadership. All this crap we're going through was suddenly meaningless. What's the point if you violate the rules and you get a talking to and that's it? Chief Canales and Petty Officer Wilson kind of saved the situation for us as best they could. I don't know what he said to them, but Chief Canales pulled both those guys behind closed doors and somehow put the fear of God in them. And he and Petty Officer Wilson kept a weather eye on those 2 knuckleheads the rest of boot camp. I don't know what happened to them. They graduated with us, and they didn't get in trouble after that. I hope they went on and had really good careers. Outside that first 48 hours, though, the cheating scandal, or me even getting sick with the Ricky crud, anything dealing with recruits is called Ricky. And I got the Ricky crud good. You know, you have college kids go to college and pack into a dorm, they get sick. People jump onto a cruise ship. A lot of times cold goes through the ship. Same thing at boot camp. I got the Ricky crud good, had a 103.2 fever. It was over 103, highest fever I've ever had that I know about. Spent 2 or 3 days shivering in my rack in the berthing, and miserable is being alone at 11 o'clock in the morning in an open bay berthing that can house up to 90 men shivering with a fever and chills by yourself. I would so much rather have been on the grinder getting the crap beat out of me by the RDCs with the rest of the division. But those stories are not the one that jumps out at me once the first 48 hours are over. The one memory that jumps out at me was a game of 4D chess I played with Petty Officer Wilson one morning. This memory really embodies my boot camp experience. In fact, it really embodies what boot camp is supposed to be and do for recruits of all services. But that's a story for part 2 of this video. I want to thank everybody who's contributed their memories from their own boot camp experiences, and I'll have more for you in part 2 of And So It Begins. Until then, I hope you have a fine Navy day. Be safe. And until we do meet here again on Sparks 1524 for part number 2, go and do some great things.
Boot camp memory that I have that's the funniest one is when I went through boot camp, we were in dungarees, so we had the bell bottoms. But we had to wear a guard belt with our canteens. And every night, we had to make sure our canteen was empty. Well, guess what? I forgot to empty my canteen one night, and the roving watch, we all looked out for each other, would let us know if we let our canteen wasn't empty. Well, they woke me up in the middle of the night to tell me my canteen wasn't empty, and I chugged 3/4 of a canteen in the middle of the night. Woke up the next morning and was wondering why I had to go to the bathroom so bad. Then my bunkmate and the roving watch had told me, yeah, you chugged an entire bottle of Canteen in the middle of the night, and I don't remember a single bit of it. And that explains why I had to go so bad in the morning. But they said I chugged that thing like the bottle was no tomorrow.
So I was roving security watch, and had to go report to the OOD. And we always heard about stuff with sandwiches and how you responded. I just knew to respond with their rank and end with their rank. So I didn't know what they meant by sandwich it. So I went there, said my stuff, roving security watch, reporting. Chief said to report. I reported, then he said, all right, put down your salute. I did that, but I forgot to say aye, aye, Chief. Kept on forgetting it. He said, put it back up, put it back down, kept on forgetting it. So another chief was in there. He went, slammed his hand on the board, and he said, this is what you're supposed to say. And he kept on saying, wanted me to say, I don't care, Chief. And the chief kept on asking, he was like, I want a sandwich. I didn't understand the sandwich thing, so I was so confused. Like, why is a chief asking me for a sandwich this entire time? I was so confused. And then what happened after that was, once I was done, you have to wait to be dismissed. He had me standing at attention for 20 minutes, and I was just standing there waiting with military bearing for like 20 minutes, like, dang. And then he's just looking at me, going back to his computer, writing, looking at me, and then he said finally dismissed. So about face, walked out. I walked back to my compartment. They're like, what happened? I was like, I messed up. it was just so funny.
One night I was sleeping, and ended up sleeping just like this, and I was flat on my back, and next thing you know, I sat up and sat back down, and my bunkmate was my roving watch. He said he saw me do that, and it scared him like no tomorrow, that I just sat up in my bed, looked around, and then sat back down in the middle of the night.
So this was like beginning of boot camp. We got in our actual like boot camp out of P days. I guess I had a nightmare or something, because I woke everybody up. Because I woke up saying, no, no! And I woke everybody up. And then I heard about it in the morning. They were like, are you good? I'm just, what happened? You started saying no in your sleep. And it was just confusing to me.